Hello, my name is Jason Leahy, Executive Director of the Illinois Principals Association, and it's my pleasure to have with me our middle school principal of the year, as well as just happens to also be our diversity and equity chair on the IPA board of directors, Sonia Ruiz. Sonia, thank you so much for joining us, or joining me rather.
Well, Jason, thank you so much for having me today.
Yeah, this is great. And Sonia, you being a part of IPA videos and things is not nothing new. You were featured in our IPA stories years ago and have done some other things with all that. So sure grateful for this. And of course, you are the middle school principal there of Jane Addams and in the Valley View School District, which you've been there for. Are you in your third or fourth year there? But you've been, of course, a school leader for much longer than that.
Oh, this is my third year here in Valley View, and I have been the principal of Jane Addams for those 3 years. I became an administrator, actually. It's been a while,
Yeah.
2008. So,
Wow.
a lot of experience being an administrator in
That's
different
right.
roles throughout that.
Yeah. Yeah. Very good. Well, let's just go ahead and get ourselves kind of started back to the beginning just a little bit, Sonia, as far as your career, your background and things like what drew you into education originally?
Okay, so I guess my path wasn't a direct path to education.
Yeah.
The first time education even popped in my head, I was a teenager. I used to work at a video store right
What are
across the
those,
street.
by the way? Do we remember what video stores are?
Yeah.
Was it a Blockbuster or just a
Hopefully, I'm not dating myself, but
Well, I remember what those were. I kind of get
yeah,
nostalgic with some of that stuff. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
it actually was a mom and pop's thing. It actually was called Videotech.
Yeah.
Then I went to West Coast Video, which was bigger, but I started off at Videotech.
Hey,
It
by
was a
the
part.
way, just I'll go ahead and date myself more than you. I remember when I had to rent a VHS player to play VHS tapes, like before we had them in our house. So anyway, all right, enough
All
of that.
right.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
So I worked across the street from a high school, and there were many times I had kids that would stop and just stay there, sometimes hours, just talking to me about their lives and things they were going through. I remember one particular teenager, he was telling me about some things that he was doing um, that were not good, you know? And he was sharing these things with me and some of the things that he was doing and how it began. And I remember thinking back, like, man, I wish there were people at schools that can be there to guide this young kid, right? Because if they were talking about it, I kind of felt like they were still, there was still a possibility to save them. It's in my head how I thought of it, right? Um, so I kind of thought, I think maybe I would be good at that. That was just a little thought. Okay. Now, in looking back, I know that some of my own experiences led me into education. So I was originally raised in Chicago. So I went through the Chicago CPS system. I'm not sure how familiar you are with high schools, but you have your neighborhood schools. In
Yeah.
suburban schools, you go to your neighborhood school. In CPS, you could go to your neighborhood school, but then you also have options. You
Right.
can apply to other schools. Um, my seventh grade teacher recommended that I apply to a selective enrollment school.
Mhm.
Um, and she's the one that encouraged me. I didn't even know about that. I was like, okay. She's like, here's the application. You're going to have to take a test. I just assumed I was going to go to the school down the block, which was the school that was in front of that video test. Um, so come that spring, I find out I'm one of two students who got accepted to Lang Tech,
Mhm.
which was in the north side of
Well-known
Chicago,
school, by the way. Lang.
very well-known school.
Yep.
Um, when I got the news, the teacher was super excited. She let the class know. There was one student who looked at me and said, I don't know why you got accepted. I can't believe you got accepted and I didn't get accepted. You know, that stood with me because I always felt like maybe I wasn't good enough. You know, later, I was able to reflect and also see the hurt and pain that he might have had for not being accepted. Right.
Mhm.
And the fact that there's limited spots and opportunities for people to get a different type of education,
Yeah.
right, than the one that I would have got had I been there. So fast forward, I go to high school. I did really well at Lane, but again, not knowing some of those things when I first started off. My sophomore year, freshman year was great. Sophomore year, I started trigonometry. I'm in a class. Now, back then, I don't know how much you know about Lane, but Lane went from an all boys school to a co-ed school.
Okay.
So some of the teachers that were still there were part of the old
Mm-hmm.
doing things. So I was sitting in a trigonometry class and he was like, we don't ask questions here. If you're asking questions because you didn't pay attention.
Oh my.
So I remember turning back to the student who was behind me, which by the way is my husband now.
That's
So
hilarious.
I turned back and I asked him, are you getting this stuff? Because I'm not getting this stuff. Like
Hmm.
it's just, I was not. It was just beyond my scope. And it was hard to understand why I wasn't getting it since I did so well that freshman year. And he said, yeah, because that's how he learned and that's how things,
Yeah.
for him made sense. So I was telling a friend who worked in the office and she goes, you actually can change your schedule because it's early enough. I didn't even know
Yeah.
you could do that. So I went to the office. They put me with the department head and they did switch my schedule. It was 1 week, Jason, 1 week made a difference. Sitting in her class, by the
Wow.
time that week was over, I was like, oh my God, I get it. I get what it was. The way she explained it, the number of steps, just I ended up becoming a tutor in that math department. Had I stayed in that class, I would have thought there was something wrong with me. I would
Right.
have failed and probably would have been one of the number of people that say math is just not for me. Right.
Mhm.
Um, so those little things made me realize that the people sitting in front of you make a difference on the type of education you're going to have. Right. The person that encouraged me to go there, the people that are there that can teach differently. When I finished high school, again, I only saw myself like, this is what I can do. Nobody there, unfortunately, told me, hey, your GPA is really high. You're top 10% of Lane. You should apply to all these other universities. I applied to one, which was UIC. When I went there for orientation, when I met with my advisor, he actually said, so you got the President's Award scholarship because you graduated top 10%, your ACT
Mhm.
score. So you're going to get everything paid, including dorms, books. I couldn't even believe this, right? But
Oh,
that kind of tells you there were so many steps that were missed opportunities that somebody could have sat with me and
mhm.
said what that meant, right? And what this is the direction you're going and the things that you can do, right? So I start college. And again, I was thinking I'm going to go into helping people. So my bachelor's actually is psychology and social work. I was not thinking education. It was more that whole I used to talk to people. I know people can change, having belief in people. So I actually my career started in the Department of Children and Family Services.
Interesting.
So when I graduated, I went
Yeah,
there.
another easy place to be working, right? DCFS. Yeah, right.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Um, and while I was there, I got different exposures to the educational system because as a social worker for DCFS, you also have to be an educational advocate for students.
Mhm.
So I was able to do that. Um, but life and all the different things that I believe kind of all came together at once. I knew I wanted to go back and get my master's in school social work. So I went back to school and was working full time when I went back to get my master's in school social work. I was supposed to come back to DCFS. They were going to pay for my master's if I worked 2 more years after graduation
Yeah.
with them. Um, but that 1 year in the schools, I realized this is where I need to be,
Yeah.
So, um,
I mean, obviously, Sonia, you're working with kids at that time, and I'm sure that's having influence. But part of that has to also be connecting with the educators and seeing the work that they're doing. I'm just kind of curious about how your work with them maybe helped influence you to be like, this is the direction I need to go.
I think it was all of it, right? Like going into schools, seeing how that there were differences, kind of back to the things that I said, my own personal life, working with DCFS, my husband and I, the kid who was behind me,
I'm
we
I know another IPA talk course is going to be learning about how you guys got together after you ditched that class. You
yeah,
know, I mean, like what happened with that? But that we can leave that for another time.
that could be a whole other time.
Yeah.
We actually decided to adopt. And so our first daughter was in the system. And when she came to live with us, she was going to be 5 and she didn't know how to count. She didn't know her colors.
Yeah.
There was so, it was just sad that she had been with all these resources already in the system and nobody had provided that for her. Right. So we had to do a lot of those things. And I wish that there were people that would do that. Wish that's when I went and got my master's in school social work, right? And realized this is what I want to make sure I'm here to do for our students, right? That I can be there academically, but I can also be there for them socially, emotionally, and be able to help them to make better choices. So after that 1 year, instead of going to DCFS, I turned in my termination letter and decided I'm going to take on the debt and just stay here because this is where I need to be.
Yeah.
And I love my job. I love being a school social worker. In the school district that I was in, I had many different opportunities. Started with K through 8. I went into classrooms. We had classroom groups. I had individual groups. A lot of different experiences supporting our students and our staff. But then I got the great opportunity to open up a school, Jason. So
we can't pass that up.
yes. So they had asked us, anybody who wants to be part of this, and I had, and it may still be one of the biggest junior highs in the country. So it was 2,700 7th and 8th graders, all in one building. And again, loved my job as a social worker.
Yeah.
But the thought of becoming an administrator came when I realized I'm not going to make an impact on the actual system unless I become an administrator. So that's when the first thought of becoming an administrator came.
In a middle school of 2,700 kids.
Correct.
With middle school students, right? Like that's I still got middle schoolers in my house, and yeah, they're kind of crazy. So kudos to you for being willing to step into that.
Yeah.
So talk to us about that experience and getting started there.
Okay, so again, everybody who worked together, there were 11 administrators. So it was a team of administrators because there was an east side and a west side. So we had like an assistant principal on each side. We had to work cohesively so that everything would be the same in each floor. But because it was new, we had the opportunity to create new systems, right? Like from expectations, how do we support kids? And being part of that from the beginning, I think has influenced everything I've done till now, even when I go into the district, because I know how it is to start something new, right? So when I started there, the majority of our students were low income. It's a suburb right outside of Chicago. There were a lot of different gangs. And in just working with our students, I realized back to like what we talked about before, about opportunities and being able to see yourself doing more than what your environment is, right? So when I started as a school social worker, I started conducting field trips to like UIC, to Champaign. I would get grants, get buses, and connect with different organizations within those universities so that kids would be able to come and have those experiences, you know? There was one, and these weren't your kids who are your honors kids or AP, these, you know, I wanted to make sure that the kids that felt that they were marginalized or did not see themselves can see themselves in those schools. So I would make connections with the Latino or Latina organizations from those campuses because that particular school was about 95% Latinx students. So it was great for them to make those connections. Like these kids look like me, right? And they're here, and this is the kind of choices that I have, and these are the steps that I can continue to do. So just starting that belief in them. So there was one time a teacher from one of the honors classes came and was very upset that I was not inviting their honors class. And I explained, well, this is my field trip. So it's for the students that I service, right?
Right.
You're welcome to do the
Yeah.
trips. You know, like nobody's saying they can't be more kids, but this particular trip, this is the reason. Um, and he was very upset. And those are the kind of decisions that I realized like I have no impact on the staff or how we're going to change things or how we're going to move forward as a building and the belief, right? So that particular district had made a partnership with a university. So
Yeah.
it was easy for me to just stay later a couple days a week to do my program. Becoming an assistant principal, and and here is where I'll probably get into some advice that I can give some people. When I
Yeah.
started off, I was the only assistant principal who was bilingual. So I was put on a floor where half the classrooms are bilingual classes for that grade. The following year, our demographics were changing. So we needed more rooms. So I was going to be moved to the third floor of that particular building. And my staff actually asked the principal, because I was moving, if they could move with me because of the relationships that we had made and the work that we were doing. So that was a great testament of the work that we were doing in a small scale, because it was one floor, right, of this whole building. And then we went to this bigger floor on the third floor. I was there for years, and my principal, so I know sometimes it can be hard. Change can be hard.
Yeah.
I was asked to move to a different floor, which was the fourth floor, which is the biggest floor, because of my background in special ed. In that particular classroom, there weren't bilingual classrooms. There were more co-taught classrooms, or self-contained classrooms. And she felt that that particular floor had many different administrators, that I can bring what I have brought with the other and do it at that scale. And at first, I'm not going to lie, I had created years of relationships.
Yeah. Right. The time helps, right? Makes a big difference.
So,
and just replicating that on the spot, it takes more time, right?
It takes more time.
Yeah.
But I'm glad that change happened, because it showed me what I can do as an administrator and as a leader. And we did create that. We were able to replicate, and it doesn't happen overnight,
right.
But creating those relationships, that trust and that belief can be replicated, right? Mm-hmm. So eventually I became the associate principal, which was like basically a principal of the side.
Yeah.
And I worked on assessments and the curriculum and scheduling and those kinds of things for the overall building. Mm-hmm. It was a great experience. Again, I was there since it opened, so like 14 years, and as an administrator, almost 10. And our team was great. And I guess I never really saw myself outside of that environment. And this is, I hope that administrators can see their journey, that it isn't just one path, right? So for me at that time, I felt like, yes, people respect me here. Yes, I can make the changes. Yes, we can do all these great things, but they know me. Mm-hmm. This is why it's working. I'm not going to get the same thing if I go somewhere else where they don't know me. I'm going to have to prove myself. You built up
the relational capital, right?
Correct.
With all of these people, right?
So I felt like I don't think this is going to work anywhere else. So some of it had to come from my own belief in the things that I can do, right? Mm-hmm. And I went to a conference, a dual language conference. And at that conference, I learned about some things that this other district was doing at the high school level. And there weren't as many Latinx administrators there because the population of Latinx students was not as big. But I loved their philosophy and the things that they were working and starting with the kids, So I did push myself to go to a district that I totally, if you had asked me anytime before that, I probably would have said, I'm never going to apply there, because I just didn't know if they would see me as a person that could grow there. So that experience was totally different experience. It was a North Shore type of district, which was very different than being right outside of Chicago, right? Mm-hmm. So having a district that was, I think, like 144% federal fund, like all their funding is at
Yeah.
144, not even
Yeah.
100%, right? It's above because of the community is very
Yeah.
different with the things that you can do versus a community where they weren't totally funded.
Mhm.
So I think that that gave me a whole different experience, but it also, I think, provided a different lens. And that's when I got involved with diversity and equity,
Mhm.
because there are things that people were not considering or thinking about because they didn't have that, right? So I'll give you an example. During COVID, we had this student who had just um, immigrated here from a different country. So she didn't speak the language. We had given her a Chromebook, but she couldn't even read it. Like that wasn't even her language, right? So I went and changed. How do you change language on a computer? How do you do, so I did all the software type of things for her. But then it was like the country she came from, she had never even used a computer. So just those different things that you don't realize unless you stop, have a conversation, find out. So I made connections with the library, because during COVID, the first couple months, because then we like opened later, I needed somebody that was going to be there for her to support her, right? And in the community, I was able to make those connections where the mom could take her to the library and the librarian knew what they were working on and making those connections. So those are just the little things that I think when you come in from a different perspective, you don't know what to ask if you've never been in that position, right? Um, so I feel like all those different experiences have made me the administrator I am today, right?
Yeah.
When IPA first decided with Denise Gamble, right? Like she was our first diversity and
Mhm.
equity chair as a state. At least in Lake County, they had sent out an email. Is anybody interested in doing this? I didn't even know what it was, but I was like, I'm doing it.
Yep.
Like,
Yep.
and again, because I felt that I was going to be bringing a different experience than other people, both professionally and my own personal experience.
Mhm.
And then just started creating and having different speakers come talk from that community, from the different perspectives, the students and families that were there, that we had never considered. These are things we should be doing, or how do
Yeah.
we address these things? And some school districts are bigger and they have those resources. But when you're a part of a region, you can share some of those ideas and work together on how, oh, wow, I never even thought of doing that.
Yep.
Yes, that's something I can do. Um, and then now I'm here and I feel like this is the most diverse place I've ever been. So I think there was a newspaper article that actually named Bolingbrook as one of the most diverse places in America. And my school kind of reflects that.
I've been there.
So
Beautiful place. Beautiful school.
thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you. But I think all those different experiences now here at Jane Addams, like usually when principals create school improvement plans, we think of the math, we think of the reading, right? And
Yeah.
we think about what are the benchmarks for that.
And understandably so, right?
And
Because of
understandably so.
accountability
And
that,
that has
yeah,
not gone away. That is still
that's
part
exactly
of
right.
who we are and
Yep.
what we're measuring. But as a district, equity was important for us, which is one of the things that attracted me.
Mhm.
So some advice for people who are looking for jobs: don't just look for an opening. You have to find a place. It shouldn't just be a match for them. It should be a match for you.
Yeah. Yep.
Um,
It's kind of like a
and
marriage, right? I mean, you got to have a
correct,
good fit
correct.
for everybody involved, for sure.
And I feel like at least here, I was given the autonomy to be the leader that I believed in, and their values matched my values. So I was able to do those things. Or it may not necessarily, there might be some other areas where maybe just didn't match somewhere else, or I only went as far as I can go in that particular area, in that particular place.
Yeah.
So don't just take jobs, because that can end up, I think that's what turns some people away. You asked early in the interview, like, some administrators don't stay long in the job, right?
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think it's finding out just because they may not work in one district doesn't necessarily mean it's not going to work somewhere else. And again, back to that math example, I was good in math, but if I had stayed in that class, I would have thought
Right.
I was not, you know.
Yeah.
I think the same thing occurs in education. You're going to have to find your fit, you know.
Yeah.
And so anyways, back to the school improvement plan. Equity is a big part of what we do and measure in different ways. Um, Gathering student voice in different ways that we do, making sure students belong, feel like they belong, their sense of belonging. So when we look at data for those things, there's so many ways you can measure it. One of the ways we do that is using the five essentials by breaking down, okay, yeah, our overall can be this, but what do each subgroup feel? What do they report? And then we do our own internal surveys from that. We provide PD, but I have a committee all dedicated to equity that we look at the different things that we're looking at. And it's not just race, it's equity across the board.
Yeah.
So like for our school, we've even changed how dances are. Because one of our programs at our school is our multi-needs program. So there's five middle schools here in Valley View. But all the multi-needs students come to Jane Addams. So we wanted to make sure that their parents and that the students felt like there's a place for them as well. So kids can wear headphones. So there's if they're sensitive to
Or
sound,
sensory types of, yeah.
sensory
Yeah.
type things. We now have a game room and a movie room. Before we only had like the basketball going in the gym and the dance. So that it was just very athletic based, not necessarily for all the different needs. And that has changed how we do things as well, right? So like, how do we make sure that we're not marginalized students, even with our regular procedures and systems that we have in place? And I don't know, unless you're proactive and intentional about it, to kind of start looking at all your systems, those things don't change for the most part, right?
Yep.
So,
Yep.
and again, it's what you're focusing on. So those are some of the things that we do focus on. And it's been an amazing, amazing experience here. Last night, my board just acknowledged that I received the middle school principal of the year for the state of Illinois. And I said a little speech. I shared a little bit about who I am personally. And when I came out, I had a parent who asked me if she can hug me, and she was like, I'm just so thankful that you're my daughter's principal. I've had kids who, this is a true story, when she saw me, she came from another country. And I spoke Spanish to her and I told her, oh, I actually was born in another country myself. She said, oh my God, so it's true. Your dreams can come true, So I know there's a lot of different debate about representation, but representation matters.
Sure.
If kids can see themselves, like if I can do this, they can do that, right? And just continue to reiterate and encourage them and let them know. And we celebrate them for all the different things they can do, So like IR is coming up. We don't just celebrate the fives. Of course, we want to celebrate that. But we want to also celebrate all the growth the kids did, Right. And then having those conversations with them, like, oh my God, you were here and then you were there. And now, so they're aware of that. So there's goals around that. And how do you move forward? So there's just so many different things that you can be doing that I feel like it's different because throughout my years of experience, I've kind of kept adding to my own repertoire and abilities and things that I see that work.
Yeah. So as you're telling your story there, Sonia, and thank you for all of that. So I reflecting on a couple of things. One, so I was just reading about what some of your colleagues there in Valley View had to say about you. They really appreciate your mindset around diversity and equity and inclusion, and how it just drives kind of your servant leadership model that you have for young people. And as you were telling the story about the young girl who came to the U.S. from different countries in school, doesn't speak the language, and you're trying to build put together some resources for her to be successful. It makes me think about the mindset you had for that. And we think about sometimes I feel like that for kids that are coming from out of the country and maybe don't speak the language, that there's like some special type of leadership or work. Yeah, obviously that we have to have certain things to meet their needs, but the mindset that you shared for her and ensuring inclusivity for her so that her needs were met is the same type of mindset for inclusivity that I want for my dyslexic son who needs some very specific types of supports. And, we're, as you know, because you sat in our board meetings and we've had these conversations at IPA are related to reading instruction and how we have to course correct on a lot of things that we've done over the years. Not fully, but there's some things that need to be done so that things that my child needs moving forward will be there. And so without that type of mindset and servant type of leadership, that's just not going to happen. And so I'm really grateful for that, and just think about how we need more leaders like that are willing to look with some ways may seem non-traditional, but are not. It's just making sure that kids are getting what they need.
Oh,
So sorry,
thank you.
sorry for me digressing there just a little bit, but I was just thinking about that, and that's one of the things that I'm going to really pull away from this conversation with you.
Jason, I feel the same way. My three children are very different. I just told you about my oldest,
Sure.
and the support that she needed that I wish the school would have given her,
Right.
that she did not get. Where my other two children had very different school experiences, but I still wish they hadn't gone through some of the things that they had gone through, and that somebody would have taken the time to have been there and supported them academically, but also socially, emotionally, because they were very different, and that we're here. We have them for about 8 hours a day
Yeah.
sometimes,
Yeah. That's right.
um, and making those connections. And that may look different, right? Sometimes it is through additional support, but sometimes it is encouraging them to go beyond where they're at because they can do more, right?
Mhm.
So having more students in those honors classes and moving them up and encouraging them to do certain things. I think all of that, we do need to think beyond just this is how we've always done things. How do we make sure we support our students where they're at? And I
Yeah.
do always think back to my kids and the things that they report that has not made schools such a great place that I wish somebody would have, right? So it does help having kids because you get a whole different lens and window to what the education system looks like through
Yeah.
their eyes, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. For sure. For sure. So, Sonia, you've been a school leader now. You talked about getting started in '08, so that puts us at about 16 years or so in,
Yeah.
right? And
Yes.
it's interesting. I've been doing this for a bit myself, and some days are really long, but the years seem to go fast. But you've had to, I'm sure, deal with plenty of tough days, like we all have in leadership positions. I'm just kind of curious, what do you do for yourself to make sure that you stay sustained? You keep up your endurance, you stay resilient, uh, you know, th- through the work that you're doing. I'm just kind of curious of, what are some strategies for you?
So for me, because everybody has to find their own things that work for them.
True. But we might get some
Um,
ideas though.
um, number one, you cannot take things personal. You
Oh
know,
yeah.
You can't. You're gonna deal with a lot of people who you're the first person they're dumping,
Mhm.
and they're coming with all their emotions and things that they're going, and you need
Past
to just
experiences, right?
past
Maybe that they've had at
experiences,
school or whatever.
all of
Sure.
it,
Yeah.
all of it. And you need to be able to swift through all that and hear them. Like, what
Hmm.
is their concern and how can I help them within my realm? Right. And you can't take everything on. So I do, when I leave here, which sometimes, like I said, yesterday was 8 o'clock, um, I speak to my best friend every day on the phone. She was the second student who got accepted to Lane. So by default, we ended up
Oh
becoming
wow. Wow. That's
so
amazing.
yes. So we talk, and now it's almost not just after school in the morning, and we kind of connect. And although she's not even in education, just having someone for me to
Yeah.
kind of go through my day, just helps. So I never actually come home with anything because it's done and over with, you know? Um, I have my own things that I do like to do for my free time because I have a long ride. I do love my job. So I actually travel from Chicago all the way to Bolingbrook.
Oh my, wow.
So it's almost about 70 miles
Yeah.
round trip each day. So I do have audiobooks in the car. So I hear a lot of different books. And for me, that's distressing, you know, like it does help. And you need to create partnerships. I I can't stress that enough because what you may be going through, although you are alone in this particular building, there are other administrators that may be going through the same thing.
Yeah.
So sometimes connecting with somebody and just, hey, can I talk through this with you? This is what I'm thinking. What are you thinking? Kind of helps because then again, you're not taking it personal. You're really trying to find the best solution. And even if that doesn't mean it's my solution, just by finding what's best and seeing those things, then help. And taking the time to walk through classrooms and seeing kids, for me, fills my cup, you know? So like today, before our interview, I walked between all the periods, but I did some classroom visits and I went through the lunchroom. And the kids have like amazing things to say to you. And Miss Ruiz, Principal Ruiz, can I share this with you? And can I talk to you about this? And then that fills me up because I know that they've made those connections with me, that they can come to me and have those conversations. If you don't connect with your students and your staff, it is going to feel very lonely, you know? So, you can't just think you're going to lead and do it from here by yourself. You need to actually interact with the people that you're working with.
Yeah. Well, and you've got good people there, as I mentioned earlier.
They're amazing.
And I tour all the buildings. I try to, the IPA board members, when they're on the board, and yours was one of the funnest because you had kids give the tour. So that was definitely a lot of fun, and I'm sure grateful for that. Well, Sonia, it's been a pleasure here chatting with you a little bit and hearing you share your story. And of course, here as far as IPA is concerned, we'll have plenty more to come with your work on the IPA board as our diversity and equity chair. So grateful for that service as well. So thanks so much.
Thank you so much. And again, I'm very honored and humbled for this opportunity to be, you know, the middle school principal of the year. I never set out to be that, right? I just wanted to do what was best for kids. And to me, I kind of feel like that award is just going to bring more kids and more staff to see that it is possible for them as well. So thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's a true pleasure. Well, again, my name is Jason Leahy with Sonia Ruiz, our Illinois Middle School Principal of the Year, principal at Jane Addams in the Valley View School District. As always, if there's anything that IPA can do for you, don't hesitate to give us a call, or you can always check us out on the web at ilprincipals.org. Take care.